I'm going to talk now a little bit about a project that is underway. The project is called Vision, Language, Learning, also Communication and Participation. You're going to get a sample of some of the slides used in a presentation that was done at a conference called AAC by the Bay. It was sponsored by the Bridge School. Sarah Blackstone, a communication and AAC specialist, was my co-presenter, and all of these slides represent our joint work. Again, this is a project underway. It is not complete, but it is an introduction into the thoughts we are formulating around the integration of the principles of CVI with the principles of communication for children with complex communication needs. So again, this is vision, language, learning, communication, and participation, breaking down silos to support children with CCN, complex communication needs, and CVI. So children with CVI and complex communication needs are at high risk for acquisition of cognition, sensory motor, social, language, literacy, communication, and participation. They need interventions that entitle them to develop functional vision, engage in meaningful interaction, and have consistent opportunities for learning. They need access to a range of AAC or assistive communication strategies, to tools and technologies so they can participate actively in family, school, and community. And also, of course, to communicate effectively. So we'll start with, some of the challenges. Challenges include, whether vision educators are required and willing to meet the needs of students with CVI. We still are asking those questions in some areas. Are communication specialists willing to make accommodations for students with CVI? So in other words, is the vision community up to speed in this area and willing to embrace the needs of kids with CVI? Are the communication specialists also willing to do the same thing? If vision and communication professionals do not have CVI skills and are unwilling to collaborate, the question we ask is, how does a student with CVI access education? There are likely many students with CVI in classrooms who are even undiagnosed. So the next slide that you see shows an array of communication or AAC tools and options. I think the thing that may impress us the most quickly is how visually complex these communication displays really are. If they're so complex and they're color-coded and they're, bump up to each other one after another, if there are collections of symbols that all exist within an area that's pink and that's paired with one that is orange, are children with CVI set up to not really be successful with these materials? So the questions are things really that focus on ways that we can support children who have these dual sensory needs. Okay, so the guiding principles then for CVI include the fact that CVI is a fundamentally different form of visual impairment than ocular forms, that children with CVI require specialized methods for identification, assessment, and intervention, that functional vision improvements are facilitated. It has so much to do with what we do. They're not just automatic, and that no child, regardless of their complex needs, is too brain injured to see. That development begins at birth, that vision, language, learning, mobility, and communication are developmentally intertwined. And they really are. They really cannot be separated. That children with CVI and complex communication needs require an integrated, dynamic, and early intervention approach that specifically addresses their development and their participation to function in the world. We are looking ultimately at full participation. If you want more information on terminology, we use the term cortical visual impairment in our presentation rather than cerebral. You can refer to the statement on cortical visual impairment published in 2010 in the American Printing House for the Blind's website. You can find that, and you can also find that at the American Foundation for the Blind. That we also are basing this information around cortical visual impairment on the work of Dr. James Jan, and that we are supported by principles that are really driven by the Pediatric Cortical Vision Society, which became a society finally in 2014. Okay, so I want to give you just a little overview of what we've kind of been working on and where we hope to go. First of all, this vision, language, learning, communication, participation framework really began with an experience that I had in Pittsburgh that was one that was based on a presentation that I did, a co-presentation I did with a speech therapist. This speech therapist had received training in CVI, was very enthusiastic about sort of the joint process of working together around the communication needs of children with CVI. So we did a very brief 1-hour presentation at a national speech and language conference in Pittsburgh. And in the audience was Sarah Blackstone, a person who is very prominent in the field of augmentative and alternative communication. And she said to me, after the presentation was over, she approached me and she said, we, meaning people in her profession of speech, language, communication, we don't know this information. We don't have this information. And we need this information. So the two of us sort of began a collaboration and found that we had really very similar points of view about children with CVI and complex communication needs, but that we were working in what Sarah Blackstone calls silos, that we have these towers of knowledge that are solid and deep and broad, but that they don't really touch or interact. And that we really need to think more about these towers, these individual silos kind of coming together to form one silo, which is the joint needs of the children. You'll see that there's also an image that kind of suggests this concept of finding a way to collaborate, where you see the fishbowl where there are fish in one bowl and an individual fish jumping from one bowl to the next. In other words, we sort of have to take a risk, we have to take a leap out of our own environment, our own learning, in order to join into a team. So I'm going to just share with you that we are looking at a number of things. That when this framework is finally completed, we'll be looking at things that will be broken down into a series of areas. We're going to look at the overall goals for the child, their learning environment. We'll look at partner behaviors. What is our role with the child as their communication partner? What are the characteristics of the child that we need to address in order to be effective partners? And then finally, what are those strategies around vision, language, learning, communication, and participation? So we broke it down. The ultimate really approach that we used was to look at Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 CVI. Those scores of 0 to 3, then above 3 to 7, and finally in Phase 3 above 7 to the theoretical 10. We looked at the combined needs within each of those, and we tried to come up with something that we thought would be a way to blend those needs across the CVI ranges. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of that information. So in Phase 1, we talked about the goals for vision, including building stable visual responses. Also, in terms of communication, the development of concepts for objects, actions, and locations. So the child in Phase 1 is really only using peripheral or low acuity dorsal stream vision. You don't see anything in that particular box that suggests pictures, for example. That we are going to provide multiple learning opportunities across the day and attach meaning to familiar, preferred objects or activities, or even people in their environment. Again, because in Phase 1, novelty is such a giant issue. So we're going to start with our communication programming around these principles. We'll look at the characteristics of the child in phase one. That the child also does not look at people, does not establish joint attention, a very important communication construct. That eye to object contact, so when I place an object in front of my face, eye to object contact means that you can see my eyes line up with that target. My eye and the object are aligned, even if the object is slightly skewed. So the child is mostly using that peripheral dorsal stream vision to notice where something is. Eye to object contact, rare. Visual responses are intermittent and rare, so they come in little doses, little tiny doses. That the child may turn in the direction of a target using peripheral vision and is all dorsal stream. Parents may report that the child attends mostly to auditory information at this point. Very often parents will say, he loves music, she loves people, she loves when we sing, but you don't hear too much about the objects or materials a child seems to interact with. There's often a favorite color. Red or yellow are very common, could be another color. So when vision is engaged, children who can talk may label familiar objects. We may see echolalia at this point in very concrete language, like I see it or I want it. Non-speaking children may vocalize, smile, or move body parts as communication signals. But remember, in phase one, they cannot use 2D materials. So we think of sort of a sample script. Dr. Blackstone and I were considering and are continuing to expand our ideas around this sample script. How intentional do we really want to be as we integrate these things? It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to actually do it. So we discussed the need for a sample script in which first there were sort of 5 steps to this. The partner sets up the activity. So the partner finds the materials that are appropriate, sets it up, gets it ready, creates the correct environment. The partner presents the favorite, bright colored, shiny, or moving object, uses light, it can be a backlit device or a light box or a spotlight, and movement to highlight the object. The third step, the partner waits, because latency can be prolonged and frequent here, and the partner is silent during that period of latency. Then the child responds. They respond by possibly turning in the direction, opening their eyes, maybe occasionally even showing a brief fixation. And the 5th step is that the partner confirms and expands the visual response. Okay, so this is now where the partner would say, yes, you found the red, shiny, round ball. This is a key to building concepts in language and learning about the world. So, in phase one, some of the principles are, again, vision, language, learning, communication, participation. Vision, lots of practice using 3-dimensional objects in short sessions. We're going to use a light box or a tablet device with apps or a flashlight to draw attention. Movement can help. Favorite, familiar color objects, and minimize sensory input in a darkened room. That upright mobility, in terms of learning, upright mobility may be a huge help. That we're going to provide a way to ask questions, comment, or label. That stable positioning for seeing and communicating is critical, and that we'll use language in ways that support learning. The language piece of this includes a tablet that may have a colorful, simple app where no auditory or touch is required. Remember, this is just building visual responses. A simple digitized device may work. Partner-assisted auditory scanning may work. We're going to provide input that includes labeling the object using very few words and a slow rate of speed. And encourage vocalizations and speech approximations, including comments, requests, labels, and questions. So in this phase, the chart that you see on the next slide shows a phase one table. And on that table you see there are suggestions for no tech, which are body-based things, low tech, non-electronic, and high tech, electronic choices in phase one. Under no tech, we have yes-no options, skilled partners for partner-assisted auditory scanning with branching, speech approximations, gestures and signs, all no tech. Low tech could include things like objects or a card that the partner uses with vocabulary to help support partner-assisted auditory scanning. An example of high tech in phase 1 would be a tablet device without sound or voice, and apps that don't make noise, such as the app Fluidity, as an example. So let's talk about how this works then in phase 2. In phase 2, we have increased use of functional vision. We have a principle in which vision precedes the action, so I want the child to actually look before they attempt to reach or swat or even get voice output back through an eye gaze device, but vision precedes that action. If we see this, we're going to probably rearrange how we do it. Vision precedes the action. We have the intent to impact or activate objects or events. The child now sees their power as someone who can actually make something happen. And vision plus reward occur. We'll distinguish salient features in phase 2. We'll use comparative thought and language like, it's got a handle, it's your cup. Increase understanding and use of language for objects, actions, and locations, and the child can participate in academic and pre-academic activities with modifications. The characteristics of the child in phase 2 are that they swat, reach, move toward an object, that they use objects functionally throughout the day. You can begin at the end of phase 2 to introduce 2D materials. That's usually a score of about 6 on the range. The child may orient toward faces, but will not have sustained eye contact. We want to avoid things as partners that include phrases like good looking or use your eyes, because we accept and understand that the child would already have done that if they could, that prompting, coaching is not going to make that better. Some visual fixations, nice eye to object contact will develop. The changes from early to late phase 2 are pretty profound, with increase in visual attention, including the ability to look at targets that have additional sensory input. That familiar contexts are still necessary, that the child's going to still have difficulty with novelty. The child begins to identify salient features of objects because now they have more central or detail vision, and the partners need to support the AAC options the child uses throughout the day. If the child speaks, they may comment, label objects, actions, use descriptors. Non-speaking children need access to lots of vocabulary. So what does that sample script look like? Well, again, 5 portions. First, the partner sets up the activity. They can present objects more toward midline now. They don't have to be way out in the periphery, and may say things like, see if you can find, or let's see if you can look at the, and then we'll, so that kind of if-then we'll begin the interaction. So in other words, vision preceding the action. So let's see if you can find your spoon, and that'll let me know you're ready for another bite of your lunch. May introduce 2-dimensional photographic images in phase 2, mid to late phase 2. In phase 2, we label the object and describe 2 to 3 salient features, like, here's your red cup. It's got a handle, so you can hold it. Incorporate comparative language. This cup is like your yellow cup, except it's small. So we're actually using language to support vision and to expand a child's cognition using these comparative phrases. The third part is that the partner waits because latency is still present, but decreasing. The fourth aspect is that looking precedes the action, so the child may reach or swat or say something or make eye-to-object contact to begin to make choices and to ultimately begin to compare and even sort. This thing belongs to this class and the other one belongs to another group because they share more visual aspects. And the fifth aspect there is that the partner confirms and expands, like, oh, you found all the pictures of the ducks. You put all the blue blocks in the box. You found the dog in the picture of the room. Or you found the switch and told me what you wanted. So now that confirming what they did can expand. So in phase 2, we talk about vision plus function, where we can add 2D photos, add more colors, that we can increase the sensory environment, that some auditory, tactile, even vibratory information won't stop the child from looking, that we're going to increase more independence at the learning phase. Again, position is critical. Technology to make something actually happen because of vision plus function. And we will, in terms of the phase 2 language and communication, this is where we can think about things like a tablet or other AAC strategies that we'll talk about, partner-assisted auditory scanning to build more or larger vocabulary, still more wait time, and this is again that place in which salient features are introduced. So what are the suggestions for AAC tools and strategies in phase 2? No tech, low tech, high tech. The no tech could be some of the same strategies we talked about before. Skilled partners, access to vocabulary beyond objects and actions, beyond, you waved, or this is the ball, this is the cup. Beyond that we're going to expand that information we're giving the child. That partner-assisted auditory scanning now with branching for sure. Making choices using a few objects or photos. Using recognizable signals that include gestures, signs, head shakes, and so forth. The low-tech options are objects, 2D materials, a communication display or even book, simple visual scanning system, a card that the partner uses for auditory scanning still may be a prompt for the partner. And the high-tech choices in phase 2 can include a tablet now with sound. Certain apps that actually have sound integrated or as a reward, that switches that activate toys and speech output, computer with software including photos and other meaningful graphics, and communication devices with direct select, switches, and with and without scan. Okay, so the last part we'll talk about then are the goals for phase 3. These are to refine and integrate the use of vision for increasingly visually complex tasks. Distance vision is increasing, so we're going to support the child's attention to actions, locations, and people. Increase access to incidental learning opportunities because now the child's able to actually be assisted in noticing something that happens beyond arm's reach. Increase access to robust and large vocabulary to support vision and learning. Use academic and pre-academic materials to enable participation, again, though still with modifications, and increase independence during functional activities across the environment. The characteristics in phase 3 include things like the need for adaptations for complexity, novelty, and visual fields, because that lower field is often still really affected. An example would be a slant board. Complex and novel environments are still more difficult. Orientation and mobility may help identify salient features of routes and help the child generalize the information. The child remains dependent on familiar visual schemes. In phase 3, it is not uncommon to have children identified as having attention difficulties in some situations, because if they're given materials that are overly complex, and that threshold is fine, that they may actually appear to try to avoid or escape the activity, which should be a sign to us that actually this still needs to be modified. They may function a little bit better if they're moving visually. They may function better if they are, kind of moving, walking, or in a wheelchair. That we still will highlight using color on salient features of images, words, and symbols. This is often forgotten in phase 3. We think by now you should be able to just see these things, but new things especially. The part that conveys the meaning, the part of the symbol, the part of the image that conveys the meaning can be really much more accessible through color highlighting. I think about the little boy that's his picture's on the cover of my book, and he's a child who learned symbols, the Cantonese words, by actually highlighting. His mother highlighted with red the parts that actually conveyed the meaning between symbols that otherwise were pretty similar. And that was how he learned a large sight word vocabulary. That we encourage meta-talk, providing access to large vocabulary and AAC strategies to support continued development of vision, learning, language, foster successful communication with peers, with families, and teachers. So let me just take a moment and talk about what that sample script might look like in phase 3. Again, still 5 aspects. The setup is that we say things like, well, tell me what you see. So now instead of just telling the child, which would be direct information, in phase 2 we're actually going to provide the language label but also compare it to something. In this one, we may actually, if the child can speak, ask them to strictly identify it. Or show me how these things go together, assuming the child has more comparative thought. You've seen things like this before. Tell me what you first notice when you're walking. Or let me know when you see the... So if the child can't talk, they can let them know in some way. Every time you see, every time we're outside and you see a ball out in the playground, let me know. Find all the pictures that look like this one, or which pictures of faces are girls. The second phase is to think about incidental access, where we describe the object, the event, the activity, the people, using salient features and comparative language. The third phase is still wait time, that we still cannot assume that all latency is gone, especially when the child is stressed, in a novel situation, is working with difficult materials. The fourth aspect is the child output. More complex language through speech or AAC strategies or tools, the child may now be expected to express personal contributions. How do they feel about something? What do they think about it? If you were to pick one of these, where would you start? Images, environments, how things are alike and different. We're going to ask the child to plan an action using a cognitive representation, a map, if you will, based on salient features of routes, so salient features in front of them, at greater distance, and even as they're moving. Connecting novel experiences, these new ones, to past visual information, and the confirmation phase is that we acknowledge the child's competence. We build depth and breadth of existing schemes and affirm their ability to solve a problem. So this is where we would say to a child, aren't you something? You're right, I didn't really think about that, but you're right. The soccer ball and this other ball are alike, except the color is really different. I wonder if they're both soccer balls. So we're affirming and expanding and embedding that information. So in this one now, we'll go directly now to the strategies. The no-tech ones are still the same strategies in phase 3. Now with skilled partners, we're going to create many types of messages. Again, partner-assisted auditory scanning can continue to be a phase 3 no-tech strategy. Increased use of recognizable signals and symbols, increased use of language across environments with communication partners. The low-tech options can be the same as in phase 2, but with more vocabulary. And possible use of coding, for example, color and number. Show me if you're interested, if you want to talk about somebody that is in your school, let me know. Hit the yellow button, and we'll turn the page to all the choices about people in your school. So now it can become, those things can even be more complex. High tech now, the electronic choices are many things. Tablets with sound or voice, computer with software and graphics, especially meaningful graphics, highlighting letters and words and other symbols with color. Communication devices that include direct select switches for auditory scan, and access to vocabulary and partners throughout the day. The child may also use eye gaze to indicate a want or need. So this is now essentially, a child would have a much, much larger span of objects, materials, techniques, strategies. What's very important, and what I learned a lot about from working with Dr. Blackstone, was that sometimes the vision folks, or the person who knows CVI well, might not question or even interfere or become or provide some support around a tool that may be better matched to a child's phase 3 AAC needs, because they feel that's the expertise of the communication person. The communication person may think, well, I can make this work. It's, their vision pieces. Maybe all I need to do is make it bigger or move it closer, but that won't be appropriate. It's only through the integration of these two these two constructs, that we can actually create a much greater synergy between the vision aspects, the communication aspects, and the huge outcome of increased learning across many, many things. I want to just stop here by ending with some myths and misinformation that Dr. Blackstone and I talked about, that even when the vision specialist or the person who knows CVI really well is aware of these things, sometimes other members of the team may still be operating from concepts that were once thought to be true but no longer are. And those myths include things like, the vision of children with CVI is variable from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. If that were true, then why would you even consider selecting a communication device that matches the child's vision? There would be no point. In fact, we know that children with CVI do not have highly variable vision. We now know that it is the complexity of the array, it is novelty, its other characteristics are the interfering part. Another myth is that we should always use a black background when working with children with CVI. That is not true. That's a phase 1 and part of phase 2 strategy. It's the reason that we do the CVI range is to figure out what that number is so that we can match the interventions to that score. A third one is, and this is a very common one among non-vision folks, is that we should present objects and activities at midline, which is a very difficult place for a child with CVI to see, usually off midline, slightly to the right or left. That we should conduct CVI therapy sessions in natural settings. There is no such thing as CVI therapy. The interventions span across the day, including their communication needs. That vision can't exceed the child's cognitive level, that some children are too brain injured to see, and we know, based on the data we've collected at Pediatric View and lots of other incidental reports, that children from all kinds of backgrounds with various types of medical etiologies make the same progress. Do they all have the same cognitive level? No, but we find out how they can use information once they get access to information. The children with CVI and ocular impairments require the same kinds of accommodations, and we know they do not. All vision educators have skills to address the unique needs of students with CVI, and I would say that's a goal that is not yet, in my opinion, quite a reality. I always share with parents, make sure that your teacher, the visually impaired, has knowledge and expertise in the area of CVI. 8, that children with CVI do not need orientation and mobility instruction. And of course, we know they have a right to O&M, just as any child with visual impairment does. That children with CVI have Swiss cheese vision. This is something that has been around for a long time, and it is a concept that is very confusing to Dr. Blackstone and to me. That perhaps that meant that they had highly variable vision or many visual field issues or scotomas, but I have not yet been able to assign any meaningful explanation for that one. I simply know it's not true. And the last one is that people believe sometimes that a child with significant neurologic difficulties is a child for whom vision is the least of their problems. And if you have a sense of how vision affects every area of human development, of course you will know that visual impairment probably could never be the least of their concerns. That very often, children with CVI, despite any other challenges or disabilities they face, are really addressing the world through a deprivation of information. Thus, their visual impairment could in fact be their primary concern and their primary disability. So I hope that this little introduction into vision language learning gives you a sense of where Dr. Blackstone and I are trying to go in order to look at and meld the concepts of the phases of CVI with the very important concepts of how children access communication.